And hello, Hearts of Oak. It's wonderful to have you back and to have a returning guest, been with us many times, and that is Dr. Robert Malone. Robert, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on, Peter. I know things are a little bit crazy there in the UK, and you've been doing yeoman's work, and I appreciate the time that you're committing to doing this interview today.
No, it is. It is fun times in the UK, and you have fun times in the US heading into November, but that's a whole other topic. We're going to look at your latest book, and of course, if people haven't got your most recent book, there it is, Lies My Government Told Me. You need to get a hold of that, published by Skyhorse with Children's Health Defense, with a foreword by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So if none of that piques your interest, I don't know what to do. But anyway, go make sure and get a copy. Obviously, follow Robert at RW Malone MD on Twitter or X, however you want to call it. And Malone.news is the Substack. Make sure and sign up and become a paid member to support Robert. That is probably the best way of supporting Robert's work. So jump in, put your money where your mouth is, and sign up to that. But we want to look at PsyWar, which is the book coming out in weeks. And wonderful to see Jill as a co-author. Did you have to, how did you persuade her to actually put her name to the book?
Well, she was a little upset that her name didn't get on the last one. And that's a bit of a sore point with Skyhorse. And so on this one, we actually composed the cover ourselves and sent it to Skyhorse and said, this is the way things are going to be. And we didn't get any pushback. Tony was glad to have her name on. It's just that with the prior book, they'd already built the cover before the issue even came up about co-authorship. And so it was just too far down the pipeline. But it's good to have her on board clearly and explicitly on this one. And it certainly improves happiness on the home front.
So this is PsyWar, Enforcing the New World Order. A lot in it. And maybe how did the book come together? Obviously, Lies My Government Told Me, you did that. And before we went and started the interview, Robert, you were saying about how you are keen to make it an audiobook. And I said it is wonderful whenever the author actually does that themselves. But after one book, did you not have enough on your plate before thinking, actually, you want to spend all the time and pulling another book together?
So it's really been 2 years in the making. Remember that the prior book, Lies, came out essentially 2 Christmases ago, more or less. And so it's been a while. And we've continued to write in the Substack. And just like with Lies, this represents a serialization, in a sense, of what we've been investigating and writing about in the Substack. And then we brought that together, updated those chapters, restructured them. And that gave rise to this book. And what it reflects is that really the progression is that in addition to writing the Substack on a daily basis, Bobby called me so long ago and asked me to edit and comment on his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, the first of that 2-book series. And I spent a ton of time on it. And once I got through the second round of revisions, I realized that the story kind of stopped there, and it didn't really carry forward with what was the current topics at the time going on among my physician colleagues, et cetera. And so that's really what gave birth to Lies My Government Told Me. It was kind of a next chapter, a next edition on top of the work that Bobby had done with The Real Anthony Fauci. Then having completed it and got it out the door and all that process and done the marketing, we continued to investigate a variety of things, as you know, in the Substack. And one of them was what we were experiencing, Jill and I, directly, which was these various kind of nefarious defamation, character assassination, and online hostile action, I guess is the kindest way to say it, including, of course, the really egregious examples of every time we would travel to the UK, we would get attacked by this bizarre group that we'd never heard of before called the Mutton Crew in the 77th Brigade, which was just among the more overt in your faces examples of what was going on with governments. Another one was the editing of my webpage on Wikipedia, my listing. That was very aggressive, and it's been traced back to somebody that apparently has ties to MI6. Wow. So as we were encountering this and very confused, because I've been at the tip of the spear in multiple outbreaks, but I've never seen this kind of censorship propaganda and really aggressive online attacks. And of course, I never was on Rogan before either, talking about the problems with the biopharmaceutical industrial complex. So we got it good and hard and realized that it was all these things were happening to all our colleagues around us. And that led to a conscious transition from focusing on what was going on the medical side and the vaccines and the vaccine adverse events and the manipulation of data and all those kinds of things to becoming aware that the bigger issue was not medical freedom, but it was freedom in general. And that the particular threat to freedom was this online activity and corporate media activity that we didn't understand. And then I did a deep dive into that and learned about this new approach to warfare that's called fifth generation warfare, a new way to kind of describe and contextualize what's going on. And I gave a lecture in Stockholm on fifth gen warfare as it related to the COVID crisis, and it just blew the audience away. Of course, then I got attacked because I was accused of deploying fifth generation warfare and the usual. But that led me down the path, together with Jill, of trying to make sense out of what was going on in terms of media, the coordinated attacks, the online activity, and really diving into the literature to the extent that it's available and information online, like in NATO journals and other things, about this new technology of using largely internet-based resources for a new form of warfare. This fifth-gen warfare or PsyWar is a term that's actually used by the equivalent of the 77th Brigade that's based in Fort Bragg here in the United States. And they call themselves the PsyWar soldiers. This is the unit that was derived from the Ghost Army that was active in Europe during D-Day with the inflatable tanks and all the other subterfuge. So PsyWar is a term that's used internally within the DoD, psychological warfare, and really across the world. NATO refers to this whole domain as hybrid warfare. But as I began digging into it and learning about things like OODA loops and these various strategies that are used, and the interface between all of this and the reveals from Edward Snowden in particular about surveillance, I realized that this was something far bigger than just the corona crisis or the COVID crisis, that really the COVID crisis was one of the most egregious, well-developed examples of deploying this tech. But the bigger issue was the role of this technology. And frankly, Peter, the real epiphany that led me down this road as I was diving into this was an interview that I had on GB News, in which I think it was Oliver had me on for the second time. The first time was really quite a dicey situation where you had to have a panel that all reviewed independently after he had me on. They all commented on what I had said. This was deep in the corona crisis, probably 21, 22. But this time, following, this was after GB News had one of its broadcasters deplatformed at the requirement of the UK censorship board, as you'll recall.
Which is Mark Stein.
Yeah, Mark Stein, exactly. And so I had to be teamed with basically a representative of the government. He was not labeled that way, but they have to have a fair and balanced broadcast. And so if you have somebody like me on, you have to have somebody that represents the state. And so as we were going through that, and I was talking about these topics, psychological warfare back then, the gentleman made the point that in the UK, once there is an election, then power is transferred to the new administration. And the new administration has the right, in his estimate, to act in whatever ways they felt necessary and appropriate. And that they essentially, the will of the people transferred to the government. And then the government, while it was active until it lost to a new replacement government, had the right to pretty much do whatever it wished to do. And that included the right to deploy psychological warfare on the population. And of course, the UK has been a leader in nudge technology and many of these other aspects of modern psychological warfare. And so he made this statement, this assertion, and the epiphany that hit me like a brick to the head was that when a government is willing and able to deploy this advanced technology that strives to control all information and strives to control literally the thoughts, beliefs, and emotions of those that are targeted. That is the objective of PsyWar tech. Then the whole idea of individual sovereignty and the social contract between the governed and the government becomes completely obsolete because the tech is so powerful that it can essentially control and shape what your belief system is. And so under a system like this, the idea that we have the consent of the governed and that the governed have a voice in national policy becomes completely irrelevant. And that's when I realized that we had something far, far bigger than just an attempt to censor and propagandize about a particular pharmaceutical or a set of public health measures. We had something deep and profound that was going to transform society. So that's the genesis of the book, is that epiphany, that we're facing something that's very different. There's always been, back to Sun Tzu and the Art of War, the role of propaganda and really psychological warfare as it was developed then, which really in many ways has many parallels to modern psychological warfare and military strategy. But the huge difference is the control of corporate media, the penetration of corporate media into our lives, and in particular, the role of the internet. And that gets us into some of the other topics you want to talk about, like surveillance capitalism, psychological bioterrorism, and these other things that all feed back under this metastructure of the use of modern psychology to manipulate and control populations. And that's clearly where we're at.
Let's pick up on a couple of those, and just to mention that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has written a review of it, as has Tucker Carlson. Over here in the UK, it's great to see Nigel Farage putting a recommendation to the book, and of course Andrew Bridgen and many others. So it is hugely endorsed. But I mean, we've had a massive attack here in the UK with many people being jailed. I know we've talked about actually traveling through the UK, what that means for US citizens, and I think that was more bluster rather than intention to jail. But who knows, we have a crazy far left government. But you've had people, over 1,000 people arrested for actually...
I heard 3,000.
Well, so we have had probably 1,300 have been. It's difficult to keep track, but 1,300 I think have been arrested. I think around 900 have been jailed, and of course we're looking at releasing 5,000 prisoners because you definitely want to jail all the people concerned about immigration. But you got that side in the UK, and then Paul Durov, obviously CEO of Telegram, being arrested in France, seemingly at the behest of the Sleepy Joe regime or the Obama regime. I mean, talk of that, because this is very much part of the book, and I think for the US viewers, the War and Posse, want to make sure that you don't think this is just a UK issue, European issue. This attack is coming for everyone, including every American citizen.
Yeah, that's the point of the book. The reason for anybody to read it and the reason for us to write it is to educate, to in the I hopefully not naive notion that if people become aware of the nature of the technology and how it's deployed and why it's being deployed, hence the tagline enforcing the New World Order, they'll become much more resistant to the technology. Just like when we understand the nature of advertising, it becomes harder to sell us cars and hamburgers using these various subliminal messaging tricks that are common on Madison Avenue. It's a metaphor for the advertising industry. So that's the purpose here. Now you kind of skated over a bunch of things, and in terms of the geographic distribution of this, I repeatedly emphasize that during the COVID crisis, we saw very clearly that the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, or some people call it FIVI, of UK, US as the two primary partners, historically going back to World War II, and really beyond. The core of this relationship of intelligence communities has definitely been the UK-US axis. And just to rewind, remember that we've had disclosures that there was agreements between UK and US public health officials and intelligence community that any information about vaccine harms would be suppressed, actively suppressed, under the thesis that any information about vaccine harms would lead to vaccine hesitancy, which would lead to an increased number of deaths because this was such a highly lethal virus. And we can thank the Imperial College for those misleading projections of 3.4% case fatality rate. But in terms of what's being deployed in the UK and in the US, we have multiple examples too, not as egregious as what you're seeing there with the arrests, but we do have some arrests. We certainly had the J6 arrests, but we've had some amazing examples of psychological warfare deployment, not the least of which is the pivoting of corporate media to inflate this candidate who has never won, a national election, has been avoiding interviews like the plague, and had the worst rating in terms of polling of any vice president, I think, in modern history, and then suddenly pivoted to be elevated as the new champion of the free world and the savior of humanity, being a little facetious there. But the pivot in terms of propaganda and media supporting Vice President Kamala Harris and the Harris-Walz candidacy has been stunning. Another thing that's been stunning has been the deployment in the United States, not so much in Europe, of propaganda around avian influenza. But that follows on the heels of propaganda, of course, about COVID and a prior monkeypox outbreak. And now we have another monkeypox round of deployed fear. And in the interim, we also had fear promoted about and some other lesser agents. And there's some new viruses that are kind of working their way up in the media. So here in the States, it's really easy to pull out examples that most people that are, let's call it, awake or aware that there is manipulation of thought space online and in corporate media. These are things that are very self-evident. And I'm amazed that as the book is coming out, it's almost like I wish it came out a month ago, but all of these things are validating the core thesis behind the book in real time, which I kind of find stunning. It means that we were able to detect a signal a couple of years ago that was building and respond to it, and that we have accurately detected a major issue in global politics now. So it's not that we're so bright. We just have to write a Substack every day and follow the news. And I've been subjected to it in really not as harshly as Nicole Shanahan and Bobby Kennedy have. Nicole being the former wife of one of the founders of Google, who's now divorced and was Bobby Kennedy's vice president candidate. And she was just absolutely excoriated in the press once she announced. And yet she represents kind of really hardcore mainstream liberal Northern California background, yoga, met hubby at Burning Man, the full CV in terms of Marin County and Redwood City politics, Northern California politics. And yet she has been awakened by, among other things, the fact that her daughter is autistic, which I think is what brought her into the children's health defense world and then in alignment with Bobby Kennedy. So both of these people have had it much worse than I have, but still the experience is something that you won't forget. And so it's clear to me, and I think clear to our readers, certainly on the Substack, and those that are increasingly calling them conservatives or constitutionalists doesn't even catch it. There's a growing range of individuals that are aware that we're being very actively manipulated and propagandized through a number of different channels.
Well, I want to end up with asking your thoughts of RFK, which is fascinating. But I think, as a Brit, you look at America and you think you've got two protections. You've got the First and Second Amendment. You've got the Freedom of Speech Amendment, and you've got to bear arms. But I wonder, the First Amendment, I wonder whether that actually will be protected by the courts overall. And I wonder, no one wants to call for revolution because that is bloody and violent if you look at all parts of the world. So the call actually to have arms and to fight back is not a position you want to be in, but it may be the end result. But what are your thoughts on those two protections that American citizens have? Do you think they're absolute? Do you think they'll be protected legally? What are your thoughts on that?
So, we have had quite a bit of signaling coming from the Democrat Party, beginning notoriously with, most notably, Barack Obama speaking to the Hoover Institute a number of years ago, in which he said that it was going to be necessary to have censorship in order to, quote, preserve democracy. The question is, what is it that he's talking about by democracy? And that is kind of the uniparty version of democracy that Obama is advocating for, which is a world in which it's not so different from the UK, a world in which we could call it the oligarchy, or we could call it the deep state or the administrative state, basically stands up acceptable candidates, or we could say the WEF. And I think there's a good case to be made in the UK that basically you're selecting in your voting among World Economic Forum approved candidates, is Rishi really that different from Starmer in terms of the globalist agenda? No, they're both products of the globalists. invested in. Same thing goes on here in the States. And it's become a really a growing sore point. And of course, Mr. Trump breaks the mold quite a bit, not completely, but he certainly is not the darling child of the uniparty in the United States. So the logic here, we have to have censorship in order to preserve democracy, is saying, well, you have to control information and thought so that you will be content selecting among those candidates that we offer to you. And then in terms of going beyond just the censorship, which has become quite egregious and had a lot of buy-in from the Silicon Valley moguls that increasingly are running companies that almost completely dominate Wall Street and U.S. market capitalization. The big change that's occurred over the last 15 years, really, since Obama, is the rise of these internet moguls and the massive capitalization. Now NVIDIA is coming up because of their work with artificial intelligence in particular. The financial power of these, together with the financial power of the likes of BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, BlackRock is on track to control functionally something like 80% of American corporations within the next 5 years. And of course, that extends out globally. So that's what's being defended, is the rights and privileges of really an oligarchy and we could call it a bipartisan or a unipartisan political platform to control information. And that it's increasingly in your face. We have the vice president candidate Walz from the Democrat Party overtly saying that the First Amendment is really kind of conditional, and we have to go ahead and censor those that are speaking words, just like they're in the UK, that should not be allowed. And we seem to have a growing sense, particularly in the Democrat Party, and I would call them far left, using the language of the press, where they accuse those of us that are center-right populists of being far right. And somehow they equate that with fascism, which is a little bizarre, because fascism, in my opinion, is corporatism, and it's these large public-private cooperatives that have been deployed globally now. But it does seem to be that there's an emerging consensus, certainly on the left of center in the United States, that both the First and Second Amendment are inconvenient and subject to interpretation and negotiation. In terms of the Second Amendment, there's been some legal pushback with the attempts to restrict gun ownership. But then there's been a bunch of different strategies used to limit that, one of which is making it extremely difficult to purchase ammunition. And so you can have a gun, but it's challenging to get the rounds. And this is now being tracked. And the fear among a lot of folks that are Second Amendment advocates and gun owners is that there's many reports that the IRS is now tracking information about whether you have certain types of weapons and whether or not you're purchasing ammunition, because this seems to be something that is being targeted in a variety of ways within the administrative state, such as IRS actions in terms of audits. So kind of increasing financial pressure coming from the government about whether or not you're in compliance with your taxes, which with such a complex tax code, just like throughout Europe, I don't think there's a soul in the United States that hasn't had some minor transgression that could be brought up, and they could be hauled over the barrel and whipped thoroughly, if not hauled to the guillotine, metaphorically speaking. So that's, do we have a solid First and Second Amendment? No, it seems to be that as part of this overall thrust of weaponizing government, there has been an emerging consensus on the left, particularly in the Democrat Party, that these things are antiquated artifacts of an earlier time, and we need to jettison them because they're inconvenient in the current context. Now, along those lines, I wanted to mention you talked about this concept of Second Amendment guarantees in the states. Among Second Amendment fans, it's often noted that UK, Canada, and New Zealand and Australia gave up their guns for the most part, and then they got totalitarianism in return. And so we must retain our Second Amendment rights in order to resist totalitarianism. And Mr. Biden at one point explicitly addressed that by saying off the cuff, well, we have the helicopters. So there is a sense that that there is a body of individuals, we could call them preppers, there's a number of other pejoratives that are used, that believe that they can use assault weapons and other armaments to resist the threat of violence by the federal government. That's what it is. Government is intrinsically violent. If you look at it from the framework of Austrian School of Economics and Murray Rothbard, and taxation is theft, and so is inflation under that framing. And the government, in a sense, if you take that anarcho-capitalist frame of reference, the government functions akin to a very large warlord. So this is more akin to the nature of the balkanized steady state arrangements that is very familiar with anybody that's aware of European history. So that's kind of where that's all at. Is it seems that the concepts that we thought were embodied in the Bill of Rights are increasingly subject to negotiation, let's say.
Can I ask you, because you've got, Adam, one other question on free speech, and then to touch on surveillance, and which I think are the two biggest battles we face in terms of free speech and global surveillance. But on the free speech, you've got two different ideals of how this can work out. You've got Zuckerberg with Facebook and Instagram making his apology this week that he was so sorry for failing to uphold that and doing everything the government told him to. So you've got that on one side, and then on the other side you've got Twitter or X with Elon Musk, and then even further over you've got Telegram and Gab, and you've got two ideas of dissemination of information. And I think this is what the government fear most, that free sharing of information, no longer controlled by the legacy media, but out into the Wild West. And that's why governments, certainly in the UK, and I know in the US, are scrambling to control that. But how do you see that clash developing, especially the clash with individual countries that want to restrict it, want to jail those, want to stop it, as we've seen in Brazil with X being stopped? You have to use a VPN. There is a huge assault on that freedom of the sharing of information.
So as I see it, and we expand in the book, I think citizen journalism is a profoundly disruptive technology. It is completely, and of course you are a citizen journalist in many ways with what you've done with Hearts of Oak. You embody that. Citizen journalism is extremely disruptive because it's very difficult to control. And they have tried a number of different methods, the use of fact checkers, algorithmic censorship, deplatforming, the demonetization that, of course, in the UK, you're familiar with Nigel Farage's exploits, but I've confronted it myself in terms of Stripe, which controls this financial spigot associated with Substack, and notably, of course, the Canadian truckers example. So my sense, my interpretation is that the disruption of the ability of the state, we'll use that instead of administrative state or deep state, let's just call it the state. And whether we're talking about one big state, in other words, the UN WEF future global government that they are so actively promoting, or the individual nation states under the old Westphalian kind of structure, which the UK is one of. There's a sense clearly that the loss of ability of the state to control information represents a profound threat to the state itself. And if you kind of peek under the covers of that, what it teaches us is that we have been carefully managed by the state, or literally for the likes of you and I, our entire life. We start out the book by focusing on the events surrounding the assassination of the president, Kennedy, in 1963, and then the ability of the state to prevent key disclosures about the known events surrounding that. That was a coup. Of course, we've had another coup recently with Mr. Biden, but that demonstrates how long and how powerful these types of programs in the UK, the Nudge Unit, notoriously, and in the United States, Operation Mockingbird, among many others, has been able to control all information. And in the case of the Telegram, it's Telegram, right? I always get confused. In the case of the Telegram situation, despite the veneer that was initially promoted, the storyline that this was about arresting the founder for his indirect role in enabling pornography, child trafficking, etc., these various heinous, disagreeable activities that go on that platform, it appears that was all a ruse, and that the real thrust of this, and I got to give a shout out to Mike Benz for being an early one pointing this out, the real thrust was the attempt to install either a backdoor or to obtain encryption keys, because apparently the particular thorn in the side with that platform is that it's being used to share images and information in encrypted ways, particularly from battle zones, Ukraine and Gaza. And that what that demonstrates is how profoundly the state views its right and necessity to control all information and imagery relating to its warfare activities, to battles, and the consequences of war. This is a lesson that was learned by American media, particularly during the Vietnam War. Don't show battlefield images. You will lose the endorsement of the people. And so ever since then, all of these images and information have been very tightly controlled. And by the way, in the case of Telegram, the desire is not just among the Western nations to install a backdoor or obtain encryption keys, but also in Russia, and which is why this Russian national founder has been living in Dubai and has multiple passports, including in France, where they grabbed him. He is in a situation like a number of other key leaders in this space. Kim.com is another example, where there is very active attempts to extradite and leverage or force the ability of intelligence agencies from all over the world, not just the Western Alliance, to be able to gain access to these tools. This is part and parcel also of the various tools that are used on an individual basis, like Pegasus 2, that can be loaded onto your cell phone and allow all information from your cell to be grabbed. So this, the threat of incarceration for 20 years is being deployed on the poor gentleman as a way to try to force him to comply with the demands of various states to be able to gain ready access to who is conveying this information from a variety of sources in an encrypted fashion. What is the information? Who is it going to? Who's it impacting? Who is communicating? They want to be able to map all idea space, all conversation space, and archive that as a searchable database for, I'm sure, only the best reasons, like avoiding terrorism. But that's what's going on with that one. Now, Zuckerberg is an interesting case. And this seems to be he seems to be undergoing a little bit of his own intellectual journey, perhaps. And it's been noted that he's taken up surfing, he's grown his hair out, he's exercising more. Some are speculating that he may be getting a testosterone supplementation because he's changed so much. But somehow along the way, he seems to have had an epiphany that maybe just rolling over and being the lapdog of the American intelligence community is not such a good thing. And it's important to remember that both Twitter and Facebook were literally created by the U.S. intelligence community as tools for surveillance and management and manipulation of individuals and information. So it's always been, and Google, of course, Google is a product of the CIA. In its whole founding and initial capitalization comes from the U.S. intelligence community. It was powered, the Google Maps application was purchased literally from the American intelligence community. So Google has always had this close tie and continues to do so. Facebook also, and historically Twitter, up until the point where Elon Musk made the decision to acquire it. You mentioned Gab. And Getter also is kind of in that spectrum. But these other applications that have attempted to be more resistant to the implementation of censorship and related deplatforming strategies to control individuals seem to be kind of outliers and increasingly challenged. Go ahead, Peter.
No, I just want one last thought I want to get in, and you've got a fantastic chapter on psychological bioterrorism. The viewers and listeners need to get hold of it because of that. Surveillance capitalism, another fantastic chapter. We don't have enough time to go into that, but the New World Order and global control is another fascinating one. I think it ties into not only the WHO power grab that we have seen in the pandemic treaty, et cetera, but even this week, we are seeing the UN a power grab on that for absolute control of the Secretary General, similar to what the WHO have seen. And we're seeing these...
You're talking about the agenda for the future.
Yes, but we're seeing these power grabs that actually citizens have no say and no control in, are really unaware of what's happening, and all seems to happen at the 11th hour, certainly with the WHO, and slipped in on labor.
Where it becomes revealed at the 11th hour. Often it's being planned, and they're having their meetings and coming up with their various documents that are interpreted as treaties. In this new pact is what they're calling it, that is going to be ostensibly signed this September, so this month, by heads of state. is still a treaty, just as Agenda 2030 is a treaty. And part of the manipulation of language, for instance, calling this a pact instead of a treaty, is, I think, an intentional effort to avoid alerting the general population about what is going on. But what this is an increment. It's not the term power grab. Kind of seems more in your face. It refers to an abrupt transition. At least that seems to be implied by the words. Whereas what we have is a very long-term incrementalism strategy where they build brick by brick by brick. So with this new future agenda and as a pact, and the annexes that are being deployed that assert that, for instance, we have to have global universal access to the internet and education, et cetera. And really what that is, the whole thing, if you look at their documentation coming from the United Nations, and remember the World Health Organization is part of the UN, and the World Economic Forum is a partner of the UN. That partnership terms is not disclosed. This new pact is explicitly designed to accelerate the 17 goals and objectives of Agenda 2030 because we're not moving fast enough to get there by 2030. And of course, one of those goals is, or policies positions, is that human beings have the right universally to live wherever they want to in the world, which is what underpins the open border policies. But in this case, what we're seeing is the gradual rollout in a way that's typically quiet. They don't have a lot of fanfare. It doesn't get covered in the press typically, and yet they also have it on their websites. You can go and find these artifacts. You can find these documents. So they're being transparent, just like the World Health Organization was transparent in some ways with the pandemic treaty effort and the international health regulations, even though all of the decisions were being made quietly in back rooms with small committees. What's really going on here is the gradual build out of a globalized government, a central planning organization that is built on the model of the European Union. The European Union is explicitly the model behind this. And so if the parallels are perfect. So you have the European Council, which is unelected, it's appointed. You have the European Parliament, which is elected but doesn't have any power. You have the Bundestag and the various national governments and parliaments, which are functionally they're emasculated now. Any things that they pass are subject to the authority of the appointed European Council and Ursula von der Leyen. And that is a direct analogy to the structure that is being proposed and advanced under this UN Director General, who is the former head of the Socialist Party in Portugal. It is explicitly a socialist agenda. And they assert, for instance, in this new pact, that they literally say, we have the best plans. They have come up with a series of policy positions and plans that haven't been pressure tested. They haven't been assessed in, Romania or the Czech Republic or Australia or whatever. They haven't been test fired. They've just been conceived based on the ideology of socialism and are now being advanced. This includes things having to do with the climate and global protection of other species. Just the agenda goes on and on and on. You have to watch it and listen to it and understand what they're talking about. But that's where this is going, is basically a one world government structured along the lines of the European Council and the European Union. And then sitting on top of that, so here's this pyramid stack. You have nation states at the bottom, the old nation states. But increasingly, they have lost their ability to manage their own internal affairs. They've lost their sovereignty. They've lost it to this superstructure that will become the UN, World Economic Forum, teamed arrangement. And then sitting on top of that is global public-private partnerships. These are the organizations that will be setting the agendas, performing the analyses, functioning as think tanks and directions. And these global public-private partnerships are essentially teaming arrangements between these largest corporations, the transnationals, the 1,000 largest that are the core of the World Economic Forum, and various non-governmental organizations and government structures. And all of that planning and coordination all occurs off record. It all occurs under Chatham House rules. And then they come out with their interpretations and plans that are then implemented by this one world government. In very much the metaphor that comes to mind is the former Soviet Union, where you have centralized planning. And of course, many other socialist failed experiments, Venezuela, Cuba, we can go on and on. So that's this new world order. And of course, they have their own structures that they've implemented. And I know we don't want to run over, but one really overt example that illustrates this whole ecosystem that's come to fore recently is the World Federation of Advertisers and the organization that they created with WEF sponsorship and advocacy, which is the Global Alliance for Responsible Media, or GARM. And GARM is what determines what is acceptable speech, in the sense that those sites or individuals that have a determined by GARM, and really GARM doesn't do it. They have basically AstroTurf subsidiary organizations that are much smaller that use artificial intelligence and basically their own political biases. They tend to be very left-leaning. And they determine what is acceptable or unacceptable speech. That all gets funneled up into GARM. GARM then has a tie over to Google AdSense, which literally controls all advertising on the internet. So, Peter, it's the reason why you don't have little banner ads. It's not, I like to use the example, it's not like conservatives don't buy Mercedes-Benzes, but you will never see Mercedes-Benz advertisements, let alone Coca-Cola advertisements, on any conservative media. It's because it's all been determined by this ecosystem to represent unacceptable speech and ideas. And what this is kind of a structural, artificial intelligence-driven algorithmic boycott, advertising boycott, which is to say financial boycott of a whole spectrum of media and speech, which is why you see conservative media withering on the vine all the time, and this rise of dominance of left or center-left media is because those are the only ones that can get the advertising dollars that support the media ecosystem. And here in the United States, I don't know about the UK, but here in the United States, where we allow pharmaceutical industry advertising on major media, we're now in a situation where most of the large corporate media, such as CNN, particularly egregious, and MSNBC and our other broadcast channels, quote, mainstream broadcast channels, have had a collapse of their viewership. You would think that they would be collapsing economically, but they're not. And the reason is because they are being capitalized both by the government and largely by the pharmaceutical industry. And that pharma dollars isn't just there to sell us Viagra and the jab. Pharma bankrolls major media largely to ensure that major media do not report on topics that pharma wishes to not have covered. So it's kind of a form of protectionism in that they capitalize these information channels so that they can indirectly control what they're saying. They do the same thing, by the way, with the academic journals. There's just other strategies, like they buy large numbers of copies of journals that run articles, peer-reviewed articles that are favorable for the pharmaceutical industry agendas. And so the likes of New England Journal of Medicine, et cetera, can't really survive economically on library subscriptions at your local medical school and university. They get subsidized by pharma, but through these kind of surreptitious channels. They're not necessarily posting advertising. Pharma has a lot of other ways to do it. So that's kind of illustrates how this whole ecosystem works. Is it's been discerned that one of the tools that one can use if you're a large corporation to control this idea, thought, information space is through control of advertising. And so notably, coming back to GARM, there was a decision made after Elon bought Twitter, and people that weren't watching what happened, there was a moment there where Elon was basically leveraging his own personal net worth. You could call it his market cap, because of this valuation of things like Tesla and his stock ownership in Tesla. So that was basically the equity that he was bringing to the table to get the capital to buy X, now X. And suddenly you saw the market cap on those Elon Musk controlled companies collapse. Okay, and he had to scramble. I think he ended up going to the Middle East for capital. And what happened with GARM is that as he completed the purchase, there was a decision that GARM would pull all advertising off of the old Twitter platform when the Twitter files and et cetera became clear that Elon Musk was not going to continue playing the game. And so they made a decision to pull advertising, and abruptly Twitter, now X, lost about half of its advertising revenue overnight. And at the time, it's clear now, Elon Musk, through his own statements on Twitter, was trying to play nice with the EU and with these various censorship organizations. I think that's a large part of why he hired Linda Yaccarino as CEO. People have largely been scratching their heads. Why would he hire somebody who is so tightly linked to the World Economic Forum? But I think Yaccarino was put in there in order to try to negotiate or thread the needle to keep X economically viable in the face of all of these efforts to censor. And when the European Union came out with its new censorship laws concerning mis, dis, and malinformation, and in particular, the moment when there was the effort to censor Donald Trump upon his interview in Twitter, Musk somehow flipped. And another thing that happened at that same time was there was a report from the House Judiciary Committee that had subpoenaed records having to do with GARM and GARM communications with all these platforms. And in that grab of subpoenaed information, they obtained clear written records of GARM basically bragging that they would be able to shut down Twitter or have a huge financial impact by making this decision. And so that documentation became available. Apparently, Musk was not aware that this was going on. It blows my mind that that's the case, but apparently he wasn't, because that's specifically what he cited, is that when this report came out, then he realized, and he used the terms, "We are at war."
you.